Hi everyone, my name is Rabbi Chanoch Kaplan from Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, and welcome back to the second installment of How to Be a Seder Leader. If you've watched the first video, you've seen all the different hacks and the different toolboxes that we have at our disposal to make our leadership of the Seder, our conducting of the Seder, successful to the greatest degree possible. We also discussed some of the inspiration and motivation of the Seder, the underlying why it's all important, and why are we doing this. And I emphasized and stressed that it was important that you be on board with this because you're going to be inspiring others. You need to be there first in order to bring everyone along with you. Now we're going to move forward into the actual Haggadah. But first, an Egged bus driver comes up to heaven together with a rabbi at the same time, and the bus driver is welcomed with great fanfare, and he's ushered right into heaven. And the rabbi is told, hold on, wait. The rabbi says, this is wrong. Why? And they say, listen, Rabbi, when you spoke, everybody fell asleep. When the Egged bus driver drove, everybody prayed. So this is about getting everyone to participate. It's not about your leadership per se, but it's about conducting it so that you can get everybody drawn in to have great participation. Technically speaking, there is something on the internet called the 2-minute Seder. And you might think, well, I can get all this stuff over in about 2 minutes. At least it takes 2 minutes to read, a little more to do. And while you may be pushing most of the technical buttons, it's not really a Seder. It's better than nothing, agreed. But there is a proper way to do a Seder to fulfill all the obligations, all the requirements, and to really make it into the full-blown experience that it should be, with all the color and all the confetti and everything that makes it into the powerful and dynamic event which it is meant to be. So we're up to the Seder. Kaddish, everybody's sitting around, and the food is all ready in the other room. You got everything set up on your Seder table. You got your Seder plate with all the items on it. And now it's time to start the Seder. There are 15 steps of the Seder, which parallel the 15, which are the numerical value of the first 2 letters of God's name. And this whole Seder experience, just as the 15 steps on the way up in the temple, the 15 represent the 15 levels which we ascend this evening through the Seder, elevating ourselves, elevating our dinner, and frankly, elevating our lives. Let's get going with number 1. We're ready to make the Kiddush. Rather than just have the leader make the Kiddush, which is what we do on Shabbat and on holidays, tonight everybody's going to recite the Kiddush together because it is incumbent on everyone to have a full cup of wine. I spoke last time about having a low alcohol content so that we can drink the entire cup ideally, or at the minimum, half of the 3.5 ounce cup. So we're going to have everybody standing up, and we're going to sanctify the evening over the cup of wine. Now, kadosh or kiddush also means to separate. We're separating with the past, at least mentally. We need to define parameters and make a clear statement that let bygones be bygones. We're entering into a new phase. Now, at the conclusion of the Kiddush, everyone's going to lean to their left, either on a nice little couch or on a pillow or just on your arm or even just into the air, but the symbolism is there. It's a sign of liberation and freedom. And down the entire glass, cup number 1. Okay, now there are some things that we do this evening just to get people thinking and asking. And the second step of the Seder, along with the third step, is just that. We're going to have an appetizer. Now, during dinner, you may not usually have appetizers, but in olden times, they certainly did. And in fact, back then, they would wash their hands in a ritual manner before dipping a vegetable into any type of liquid. And the origins are for ritual purity that was necessary in the biblical period. So we're going to take our special washing cup, if you don't have one like this with 2 handles, which is meant so that when you wash one hand, you don't then go and touch the ritually impure hand. We're going to fill up the water, I make the suggestion that you should have one person washing everybody if you have a lot of participants. That way it goes a little faster. We're going to pour water to cover the entire right hand 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Pour it over the entire left hand 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Dry your hands. And this time, don't say the traditional blessing. And that's because this is just to get us asking. It's not really a mitzvah to be doing this. It's one of the rituals of the Seder. It's a tradition of the Seder. Okay, next we're going to be having karpas, our lovely, delicious appetizer. My tradition is to use a onion, and that's because it has multiple layers, which is a symbol of the type of slavery that the Jews endured, which was never ending and just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And we dip this into salt water, which is a representative of the tears of the Jewish people who cried out to our Creator in heaven, asking for redemption. And you can use any vegetable, though the onion is quite traditional, as well as a potato or parsley or celery. Most important, what is it all about? It's all about asking. And we do this just a moment before we're going to be asking the 4 questions, because everybody's got to be wondering at this point, come on, where's the food? Why are we doing this little appetizer dipping stuff here? This is unusual. It's not typical. And this should encourage the questions. Next up, we're going to break our middle matzah. We have 3 matzahs on the Seder plate, as I mentioned earlier, representing the 3 different spiritual classes of the Jewish people: Israel, Levite, and Kohen. The middle matzah is going to be broken in 2. It's always a challenge to break it in just such a way that you have them in 2 pieces, and one being bigger, one being smaller. They say if you can't tell the difference, then it's not really bigger. Okay. Aha! Successful. How do I look? There's a lot of significance to this as well. One is going to serve as the bread of our affliction, over which we're going to recite the Haggadah and recall and commemorate the difficulty, the slavery, the bitterness of the exile. That's going to go back on our Seder plate. The big one, I'm going to break it up into 5. That's what the Kabbalah says to do. And I'm going to be putting it in my afikomen bag. This is going to be dessert, which will commemorate the eating of the Pesach lamb, of the Pesach offering. Now, at any point forward from this time, if your tradition is that the leader hides it, you can go off and hide this somewhere and then have the kids or have others find it. You can find it yourself too if you need to. Some people have the kids hide it and then the adults have to find it. Either way, be prepared to pay a hefty price as a gift when you need to barter to get it back. But that does have to come back to the Seder. Without it, we can't finish. And there's important symbolism to that because, you see, the small piece, the bread of our affliction that remains on the Seder plate, represents that small part of the Jewish people that remains tenacious and always remains connected to the tradition, never veers too far, never drops the ball, never falls off the wagon, always sticks to the straight and narrow. But sadly, over the years, assimilation has cost the Jewish people an incredible amount. And the majority of the Jewish people have been lost to our nation. It's important to remember we can't take comfort in our own spiritual assuredness and our own spiritual success, our narrow success. Ultimately, we need to have a spiritual homeostasis. We need to find a balance. And the balance can only be achieved by bringing the big piece, the larger part, the majority of the Jewish people back to the fold, back to our people, return them back home. Because until then, the Seder cannot end. Until then, this long meal of the Jewish people stretching forth for 3,300 years cannot end. The redemption comes only for everyone together. It's your job and my job to inspire them and bring them back home. Okay, it's time to fill the second cup of wine. Get it all ready, and we're going to have this sitting on the table during the Magid step of the Haggadah, when we're going to be telling the story of Passover. Lots of crumbs all over the place. Okay, there is really no right or wrong way to do this. Everybody should be reciting the Haggadah. And let me be candid with you. Even if you do it in great length, it's not going to take more than a half an hour. What's a half an hour? It's half the time that children are willing to wait online for a Disney ride. It's half of so many people's commute to work these days. It's just one news cycle on the evening news. It's a half an hour. I think once a year we can do this. Take your inspiration from the girl who is finally at the pinnacle of her success and gave up opening night on her Disney movie to be at the Seder. We can do this. Now, this is a little bit akin to a psychotherapy session where we're going to be analyzing the past and reframing it so that we can then grow as a result of its new reframed import. And we're going to go into our Haggadah here. Heilach Ma'anya, we begin the Magid by saying this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. Yeah, this is the bread of our affliction. Now we say, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. A very quick pivot from affliction to inviting people to come and eat with us. You see, this is a very important lesson. A free man uses his hurt to learn to treat others differently. Someone who is still in the slave mindset can free themselves and goes on to abuse others. There was a great story to illustrate this. Back in 1945, April, not all of the camps were even liberated yet. The Skulener Rebbe got a hold of a bakery. He koshered it for Passover and decided he was going to bake handmade kosher for Passover matzah. There was perhaps enough of the boxed matzah, the machine-made matzah, to go around, courtesy of the JDC, who had imported so much of it to Europe for the survivors. But for those who were careful to only eat the handmade matzah, there wasn't much of an option. He let it be known to those around that he was willing to give everyone one matzah for Passover, and everybody came to get their matzah. When the son of the great Vizhnitzer Rebbe, another great man who had survived the Holocaust along with one son, arrived, the son requested of the Skulener Rebbe that he provide his father with not one but two matzot. And the Skulener Rebbe was very reluctant to accede to his request, but after much persistence, reluctantly, he did give him a second matzah. The day before Passover came, and the Vizhnitzer Rebbe's son showed up at the Skulener Rebbe's door. The Skulener Rebbe said, "I'm sorry, we've got no more." He said, "No, that's not why I came." He says, "Did you keep one for yourself?" He, perhaps a bit embarrassed, admitted that he did not. He couldn't bear to hold on to one when someone else wanted one so badly. He had given up the one that was meant for himself too. The Vizhnitzer Rebbe said, "That's exactly what my father was concerned about. Here," and he handed him the second matzah he had taken. "This one is indeed for you." You see, both of these people had not been conquered by the Nazis. That desperate mindset of the Holocaust victim had not enslaved them. They were free people, even while in the camps, and even moments after their liberation. What was the Skulener Rebbe thinking about? How he could help others, even and until giving away the one matzah he had left for himself after all the effort he put into the operation. And what was the Vizhnitzer Rebbe thinking of? He didn't want a second matzah for himself. He was thinking as a free person of the Skulener Rebbe. Okay, moving right along to the Manashtana, the famous 4 questions. You see, it's important that we ask questions tonight because slaves don't ask questions. They follow orders. but we can ask questions, and therefore we should. Whether there are kids at the table, and if there is, then all the kids can ask. One little child can get up on a chair and do the asking, or if it's just you by yourself, you do the asking. Sing it. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot, mikol haleilot. On all other nights, on all other nights. It's a beautiful song. It evokes the memory of Jews who, in the most difficult of circumstances and the most joyous and beautiful of circumstances, as we did last year and 20 years ago and 50 years ago. It reminds us of sitting around a Seder table with nephews and nieces and grandchildren and grandparents and everybody singing together. Those beautiful lyrics shaking the hillsides all around the shtetls and communities back in Europe and here in America too. It's also, if a child can stand on a chair, they feel important, and that's a good thing too. In the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941, a Jewish child finished asking the Manishtana and then said, "Dad and Mom, I have 2 more questions to ask. Will I be here next year to ask these 4 questions of you? And will you be here to answer me?" With tears in their eyes, the parents said, "Dear son, what will happen with us next year, we don't know. But one thing is certain. Somewhere in the world, a Jewish child at a Seder table will ask their parents the 4 questions. And their parents will give their child the same answer that we've been giving our children for 3,000 years. We were once slaves in Egypt, but God took us out with an outstretched mighty arm and brought us to the land of Israel to fulfill our spiritual mission of making this world a divine abode, a holy place for God and for all humankind indeed." And now we get to the answer, Avadam Ayinu. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and God, our God, took us out from there, and now we're going to read until we get to the 4 children. The Torah speaks of 4 children. One is wise, one is wicked, one is simple, and one does not know how to ask. Now, why does it say one is wise, one is wicked? Just say there's a wise, wicked, simple, and one who doesn't know how to ask. You see, one, Echad, reminds us of Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The oneness of the Lord, the image of God is written in the psyche, both spiritual and emotional, of every single one of these children, no matter what they've done, no matter how far they've wandered, no matter what they are incapable of. God is within each of them. But also notice something else. It seems to be a hierarchy, beginning with the wise and working its way down to the lowest. And yet, the wicked son is right after the wise, and in 4th place is the one who doesn't know how to ask. And that's because the wicked son is not really wicked. The wicked son is rebellious. But rebelliousness is not a bad thing. It means this child is engaged. This child's blood pressure is pumping. The child may have some issues, may have some complaints, but the child is still in the game. The one who doesn't know how to ask, how is that possible? We said the simple child can ask. You just have to say what? Why? That's all you got to say. You see, this child doesn't care, and apathy is the worst. If the child even cared a bit, the child would say, why, what, how. So apathy is at the bottom. We need to break that. Over the next number of pages, the Haggadah launches into a didactic style of the Talmud in analyzing and assessing the different plagues, how they occurred, and how many there were. And finally, we're going to be talking about the 10 plagues. These are the 10 plagues which the Holy One, blessed be He, brought upon the Egyptians, namely as follows them. Here's a very important lesson. As Jews, we don't take any joy in the downfall of our enemies. They're God's creations too, and it's unfortunate that their hate has led to this conclusion. What do? As we mention each plague, we pour a little bit of wine, just a touch, out of our cup to commemorate their loss. Some people have the tradition of putting their pinky in and taking a bit out, but suggestion for this year, that may not be very sanitary. Maybe a good thing to stay away from that, but that's your call, but certainly to spill out a little bit of wine. And then, of course, we can do what I mentioned in our last class. We can take out our plagues bag. We can take out our large frog. We can take out our large locust and do all different stuff to make it a bit of a fun time. Okay. Dayenu. Ilo, Hotzianu, Hotzianu, Mitzrayim, Hotzianu, Mitzrayim, Dayenu. Oh, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Song is great. It brings hearts together. It pumps a bit of energy into the room and really gets people into a happy mode. It's always a great time to sing, but especially Dayenu, a traditional song. And the theme of Dayenu is if he had brought us out from Egypt and had not carried out judgments against them. Dayenu. Imagine if I told you, I'm going to give you the money to buy a new car, and then I will drive you to the dealership. But the dealership is going to be closed. You can't buy the car. Is that really enough? It seems like nothing has been done. So if the Jewish people hadn't made it to the Holy Land with the Torah, as the story eventuates, what would be the purpose of it to begin with? And yet we say, Dayenu, it would have been enough. And this is a beautiful lesson about the proper mindset. If you focus on what you have and not what's missing, that's the route to liberation and ultimately happiness. Yes, there can be more. Yes, we'd all love to have more and more and more. But you know what? Hey, I have the money in my hand. That's great. Oh, so I couldn't buy the car. Who cares in this moment? Be happy with what you do have, with whatever good fortune you have, because if you're present, you already have enough to be happy about. Okay, as we wrap up the central part of the Haggadah, we're going to be discussing Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, matzah, the unleavened bread, and maror, the bitter herbs. And then we're going to conclude with the fact that it is our obligation to recognize that this lesson is an eternal lesson, one that does not die or has no expiration date, but rather is the most important message that the Jewish people still have to offer the world. Thus, it is our duty to thank, to laud, to praise, to glorify, to exalt, to adore, to bless, to elevate and honor the one who did all these miracles for us and for our fathers. And therefore, we should sing the Hallel, the praise of the sweet singer of Israel, King David, at the end of the book of Psalms. And finally, we're going to say the blessing. Did you know that there was a blessing on redemption? Indeed, this is the evening when we make that blessing, and thank God. Blessed are you, God, our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. And then you're going to make the blessing of the wine. Lean in and drink. Cup number 2. You know, there's so much preparation and so much work that goes into this. And there was a guy who tells his boss at work, boss, he says, I really need it at home. There's so much to do, so much work. They just can't handle it. They must have me. I must take 2 days off before Passover to help out. The boss says, listen, I know it's busy at home, but you're really needed here. We can't spare anyone at this time. And a smile creeps up on the edges of his lips and he says, thank you, boss. I knew I could count on you. Okay, we are moving right along. And before we're going to wash our hands to eat the matzah, we are going to give instructions, because once we wash our hands, we should not make any interruption by talking before consuming the matzah. And the instructions are necessary here. So everyone is going to receive a portion of the matzah. The minimum size matzah to fulfill the requirement of consuming matzah on the evening of the Seder is at least a half of a shmura matzah. Ideally about 3/4, but at the minimum a half. and at least one of the square machine-made matzahs. And it has to be consumed within 7 minutes, because otherwise it's not eating matzah, as the Torah requires, it's munching on matzah. And munching doesn't fulfill the obligation. Now we're going to wash our hands as a symbol of the biblical era offerings which were eaten in purity. We're going to take our washing cup 3 times over the right, 3 times over the left, and we're going to recite the bracha, the blessing for washing our hands. We're going to dry our hands, sit down, and start crunching away on our matzah. No talking, because we got to finish this in a very short span of time. And don't forget to lean, since now, through this process of reframing, our matzah has grown from being the bread of affliction to the bread of redemption. You see, Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, and Mitzrayim means limitation. It's the can't-do attitude. And unfortunately for the Jews in Egypt, this is the attitude that prevailed. The darkness actually became the norm. They simply accepted that this was their life. They were slaves, and in ancient societies, slaves remain slaves because that's who you were. It was an identity problem that you could not escape. But through this reframing process of the experience of the Haggadah, of the storytelling, we have reframed it, and now we are at the stage of matzah. Matzah is a can-do attitude. Not only is it a can-do, it's a do it now. You see, chametz, leaven, is all about slow. Give it time and it rises. It's like saying, I can't do things today. I'll do it tonight. I'll do it on the weekend. I'll do it when my kids are out of college. I have no time for Torah study. I have no time for prayer. I have no time for greater, more meaningful activities in life. But when I retire, I'll do it. You know what the word later is? It's a euphemism for never. And the answer is matzah. Act now, immediately. That is the matzah attitude. Now that we fulfill the obligation of eating matzah, we're on to fulfilling the obligation of maror. And for the maror, just like for the matzah, you need a minimum requirement, which is 1 ounce. So what we do is we put some of the horseradish on top of the leafy romaine lettuce, which constitutes maror. It's bitter. Like I mentioned in our earlier class, the deepest bitterness is when you don't even realize it's bitter. You think that the darkness itself is light. You have to always keep one eye on the prize. You know, the pirates weren't so dumb. Why did they have that eye patch? Because when they went into the hold of a ship, fighting to take over the passenger ship or the commercial ship that they had pirated, commandeered, you go from the light into the darkness of the ship, where perhaps some of those protecting the ship are, you're going to be blinded because your eyes can't adjust. They could just rip the eye patch off, and that eye was already adjusted to the darkness. So we have to always keep one eye on the goal, never forgetting that darkness is darkness, and our slowly degraded values are not values, but we need to retain the values of our Torah. So we eat this romaine lettuce with the bitter herbs. We fold it over into a pocket, dip it into the charoset, shake the charoset off, since this should be in its natural form, not sweetened with anything else. We're not going to lean because there's no freedom about experiencing pain, and we're going to chomp down, consuming this again within about 7 minutes. Next, we're going to eat the sandwich, korech. We're going to take half a matzah again, and we're going to create a matzah sandwich with our second maror, bitter herb pocket. And when we do this, we're going to remind ourselves that this is reminiscent of the Pesach offering matzah and maror, which were eaten together back in biblical times. There's something cool about the sandwich. You see, the bread, the matzah, represents the bread of faith. The faith that the Jewish people had in the Almighty, that He would redeem them, liberate them from their long and bitter exile. And this is a good lesson for today. When our bitterness, when our struggles and our challenges are surrounded by matzah, by faith, it's much easier to consume, much easier to digest, much easier to manage. A little faith goes a long way. And you know, there were once two attorneys who were sitting in the food court on Passover, munching on their matzah sandwiches when the manager came over and said, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but you can't eat your own food here in the food court." They looked at each other and said, "Okay." And they promptly switched matzah sandwiches. Finally, it's time to eat. I hope you've done your preparation before. Enjoy your meal. B'te'avon. Gefilte fish, matzah ball soup, brisket, tzimmis, all the good traditional delights and whatever are your personal favorites. And this is a great time to sing songs, some of the Passover classics, which you can either find in the back of your Haggadah or on the web. One of the traditional ones is Chag Gadya, one little goat. And there's a whole bunch of stanzas which conclude with God being in charge. And we are reminded this evening that God is ultimately the one who pulls the strings. But there's another message in the Chag Gadya as well. Just one little goat changes the course of the whole world. And that's all we need, is one little good deed, one little action. It could be something like Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, stretching her arm out and taking the basket of Moses on the Nile River. She saved everything. It could be the staff of Moses, that one simple stick that changes the course for civilization. It could be David's sling, or it could just be you. Your one penny in a charity box. Your one kind deed or kind word that could change everything. Okay, we are just about finishing up our delicious meal, and we've come to dessert. We're at the next stage, tzafun. You see, through the work that we've put in here, we've attained the hidden dimensions of our soul. This experience has really elevated us way up. We are now in control. We have refined ourselves and have exposed and reached deeply within our souls to find the innermost beauty of our soul. And we replicate that in the physical by finding the afikomen. Go out and find it. Pay your debts to those who hid it before. I don't know what type of bargain you'll have to make, but you got to get it back, because like I said earlier, the Seder does not end. You'll have to consume, once again, at least a half a matzah leaning to your left side, and traditionally, this is the very last thing that we'll consume for this evening. As far as food goes, we still have 2 cups of wine remaining. Now we are ready to bless God, to thank God for the little things in life, because gratitude is the most important attitude. It makes us thankful and ultimately leads to happiness. Fill your 3rd cup of wine, and we will do the Birchat Hamazon, the benching, where we will thank God for the meal. After the benching, we are going to drink the cup. So we'll say another blessing, Barei Pri Hagafen, lean to the left, consume our 3rd cup. Now it's time to fill up the 4th cup, but not just 1 cup. You see, there is a 5th cup we need to fill up, the cup of Elijah. Why the 5th cup? I mentioned earlier, remember, that there were 4 expressions with which God promised the Jewish people he would save them. And for each of those, we thank God by drinking a cup of wine. But there's actually a 5th expression that refers to the ultimate redemption that we are still waiting for. And our tradition teaches that Elijah will be the one to herald that time with the blowing of the shofar, the sounding of the shofar on Mount Carmel in Israel. And we evoke that spirit at this time because the tradition teaches that Elijah comes to visit every Seder, spiritually, or maybe even physically. So we fill this cup. We don't drink it, but we do say L'chaim to Elijah, and we hope and we pray that this be the final Seder outside of Israel, because next year will indeed be in Jerusalem, but we're not done yet. You know, talk about the spiritual presence of Elijah at the Seder, or perhaps even the physical presence. There was once a man who so desired to see Elijah, and he told his Rebbe, I've done so much good in my life, please tell me how I can see Elijah. And the Rebbe says, I want you to travel to a nearby town and spend a week with a particular family. Upon his arrival there, he discovers the incredible lack of this family. They have such meager belongings, no food and shoes. It's really a terrible situation. Well, he's a man of means, and he goes out and purchases a plentiful amount of food supplies and other things that the family needs, and he ingratiates himself there, and they allow him to stay the week. Finally, a little bit disappointed, he goes back to his Rebbe and says, Rebbe, I didn't see Elijah. The Rebbe says, go back for a second time. He's wizened up a bit because he knows about the great lack in that household, so he comes with a bunch of provisions again, and he knocks on the door, and the children go running to the window to see who it is, and the parents say, who's at the door? And he overhears the children saying, you guessed it, it's Elijah. He drops the stuff on the floor, leaves it for them, goes back to the Rebbe and says, I understand. There is, in fact, a real Elijah, and a spiritual Elijah who visits our Seder table. He may not drink from your wine, but he reminds us that we can each be an Elijah in our world. And ultimately, those good deeds, the good deeds of Elijah, of you and I, will bring the real Elijah who will herald the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. We're almost done. When we welcome Elijah, we take the 2 holiday candles, and I send the kids to the door with them as they open the door. If you don't have children there, you can do it yourself. And everybody sings, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. When will he come? Very soon in our day. With Mashiach ben David, he will bring the redemption. Okay. Hallel Nirtzah, the final 2 steps in the Seder. We praise God and thank him for the miracles of those days which continue to sustain us in our times. And Nirtzah, we ask that God find our prayers and our service worthy, and that he bring us back to our homeland, the Holy Land of Israel, in a final great and grand act that will bring this world to a state of goodness forevermore. L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim. Next year, my friends, in Jerusalem. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim habnuya. In the rebuilt Jerusalem. But we're not done, because we have to drink our final cup, the 4th cup. Bless, lean, and drink. And finally, remember to pack up the inspiration and take it with you. Don't leave it behind. Tell the Seder and all its lessons. Come along as we journey through the year ahead. My friends, let me wish you a joyous and kosher Passover holiday and lots of success in leading your Seder. Go get 'em.